Hey, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm your host, Hewitt Pagenstecher. Today we are joined by Jake Silberman, who's a stand-up comic, writer, filmmaker, and he's fresh off his new release of his documentary, Back at It, which is now available on his YouTube channel, which you can find at Jake Silberman on YouTube. But Jake, how are you doing today, man?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Boy, all those titles make me feel very pretentious. So, because I just feel like I'm a guy. So thank you for bestowing all those honors on me. Filmmaker, I don't know. I don't think I could throw that one. I think I have
Hey,
a video on YouTube right now. I don't know if I really feel like filmmaker is a little higher brow than what I'm delivering to the people, but I appreciate it all the same.
yeah, no, I mean it's your new documentary, Back at It, is like an hour and 15 minutes long. That's a full-on feature film in my book.
I
That's like
guess so. I don't know. It just feels like when you think of a guy or a person who's a filmmaker, I don't know, they got a beret and a scarf and they're in a chair with their name on it. And I'm just some asshole in a friend's apartment right now in Chicago, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, of course. So you're in Chicago right now. What's going on with you? Last time, I heard you left Portland. You're on your way to the East Coast, New York. What's been going on in your life, and like, what are you doing right now?
Yeah, yeah, I'd been living in Portland for like 9 years doing comedy there. And I was supposed to move to New York pre-pandemic. The pandemic happened, so I was kind of waiting for things to clear up, in whatever way they could. And so, yeah, I left Portland a few months ago. I've been in my van. I live in my van right now. I'm just doing a lot of road stuff. I'm in Chicago for a few more days, and I was in Denver for about a month. I did some stuff in Boise and kind of all over the place. And I just wanted like a big summer kind of tour road work before I hit New York. So I'm actually randomly going to be back in Portland in a week. Um, I had some dates that I'd already scheduled out there. So I'll be flying there. I won't be driving in the van, but I'll be flying in and doing my old show Doe. And then I got some stuff in like Salem and Medford and Bend area, kind of doing like a week of shows down there. But yeah, just been doing a ton of comedy on the road, and it's good. And then I'll be driving the van to New York. I'll be there like September 1st. So I'll be there in a couple weeks, and then I'll be in New York for a while. And then I'll actually be crossing the country again in the van. I'll be going all the way back to the West Coast and all the way back. So I have a lot of comedy coming up, which is very exciting. But yeah, it's kind of crazy when I tell people I'm all over. This is the widest amount of like geography I've covered as a comedian, just like back and forth across the coast, which is fun.
Yeah. Hey, if you're ever in Portland when I'm hosting Laugh Basement at the Goodfoot, any first Monday, you're welcome to drop in. Just
Oh
FYI.
yeah, I would love it. I love that show. You've done good. Do you host like another thing now? I'm up less and less on what's going on in the Portland scene, but I feel like I've seen you. Aren't you hosting another show?
Yeah, I've been hosting. I host a show called Giggles Gone Wild with Rochelle Cochran and Amani Dene. So
Nice. Where is that?
it's at this venue called the Get Down. It's like a couple months old. It's right below the Melody Ballroom. So it's on
Okay.
6th and Alder.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
The venue's been pretty sick, and the shows have been pretty fun so far. We have our third one coming up um, this coming Wednesday, but normally it's last Thursday.
Oh, very cool, man. Well, congrats. Yeah, it's funny, like you leave, you're like, oh, like I'm a Portland comedian, but then like you realize you leave and the scene just keeps going. Like it's nothing is dependent on any one person, and like new shows pop up, new comedians do stuff. So yeah, it's cool to see.
Yeah, thank you, man. It was exciting. So right now you're traveling to a lot of places that it seems like you were last year when you filmed Back at It, right? So have a lot of those connections or like shows that you went on and people that you met when you were filming this documentary kind of helped this summer tour?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's So I filmed this in the summer of 2021. I left basically Portland June 1st, I believe, of 2021 to go out on a month on the road and kind of cover comedy and life kind of popping back up after the COVID pandemic. Um, and that was kind of my first tour. That was kind of my first, like, I'm going on tour as a comedian. I had done some stuff on the road, but I never really like just thrown myself into it. And so, yeah, I met people along the way doing that. And then after the documentary, though, like, I've gone back out on the road more and more. It kind of just became a thing that I was more and more interested in and trying to expand my reach as a comic. So, yeah, these connections have been helpful, and I've like reestablished. Like I came to Chicago during the doc, but that was just for a few days. But then I came back to Chicago for like 2 weeks this past fall, and then I was back here in March. So I've kind of made it a point to revisit these scenes a lot because you, as a road person doing comedy on the road, like these are your like you need to know people across the country basically, and so you have to go there multiple times. So I'm kind of trying to follow that playbook of just showing up, doing shows, doing well, meeting more people every time, and then like the next time you come, you can do the bigger shows or you can headline something. It's kind of just that building those relationships over time is like very important in comedy.
Yeah, I kind of dipped my feet in that in my first comedy festival last week in Cleveland, Ohio, the Six City Comedy Festival, and that was my
Oh,
first time.
nice.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Just did a couple shows there, but got to meet comics from Chicago, New York, Cleveland. Of course there are people there from Portland, and it's I'm just like so grateful that I finally meet people in case I go to one of those other states where they live.
It's a big part of it. I mean, it's crazy. Like, obviously you have to be funny, you have to be good on stage, but a lot of this, like anything, is who you know, who you can get connected with, and it's important to get out there physically, not just meeting people online, but physically meeting them, doing shows with them, and that'll help for sure. So that's good, man.
So back at it, it's out, it's on your YouTube. How would you describe this documentary and what inspired you to make it happen?
It's kind of like a weird mishmash of things. I have done this video series called Jake on the Streets for the last couple of years, which is also, if you check out my doc on YouTube, all those videos are also on YouTube, except the ones that have been banned. But uh Jake on the Streets was this project that I started pre-pandemic for this. It was just a video series where I would go on the streets and interview people, and it was very Portland based. And it was originally for a sketch show that I was a part of. So my kind of role in the sketch show was we would do a show once a month, and one of my roles was make a video about going. So we would do like, we interviewed people while they were waiting for brunch, like that was a big Portland thing, like kind of a funny thing, like, oh, you guys are waiting for an hour for brunch, or we went to a beer festival. So it was a very like local, just funny little thing. And then the pandemic hit, and comedy was dead, but there was all this stuff happening in Portland. The protests were happening downtown every night, and then the Proud Boys. And so me and the guy who were making them were just like, we should just keep filming, we should just keep doing this stuff. So we kind of made much more serious videos, where we were going to these intense political things. And so we got our practice with that, and it got me kind of hooked on making these type of videos where I was interacting with people. And so Back at It is definitely a combination of that type of man on the street interview journalism, whatever you want to call it. It's a comedy road trip documentary following me from Portland to New York City over a month, just me and a cameraman in a van. So going to all these places, doing comedy. And it's in a specific time period of the summer of 2021 when, I don't know if people have already honestly forgotten this, and I don't know maybe what your memories are, because like life kind of came back really fast, but like summer of 2020 was very dramatic. COVID was in full swing, protests, George Floyd, BLM, all of this crazy stuff was happening in America. But the summer of 2021 was the vaccines were out. And at this point, the vaccine was basically like a get out of jail free card. Like once you got your vaccine, like we thought you would never get COVID again. Like people just thought COVID was over. If you got your vaccine, you would never get sick. Obviously, history has shown that that's not exactly the case anymore. But in that time period where this was filmed, we are capturing the energy of people who are mostly vaccinated being like, I'm out, I am back. And even if they weren't vaccinated, they're like, I'm going to the bars, I'm going to shows. So it's this kind of unique slice of American life where we had the people had this like kind of raw energy of like, oh my God, this like shitty year is over. And like you see people, we were talking to people on the streets and they're like, COVID is over. We're done. I'm vaxxed. I'm good to go. I'm out. I'm partying. And we do a lot of footage, people at the bars, drunk shenanigans or whatever. So it's a mix up of man on the streets, stand-up comedy, road trip, reflection on a very specific point in American history. And it's all combined in this kind of documentary that we put together.
Yeah, I know it's a great mixture of elements, right? Because you could, you have the stand-up comedy clips, interviews, behind the scenes of the road trip, just like the little something for everybody. And that's what's cool about you doing Jake on the streets and stand-up comedy and documentaries, because it just allows like there to be a different way for people to discover other things that you do, right? If they're more into one thing than the other.
Right. And it's weird because, I feel like I'm a stand-up comic first. That's my main interest, but it is nice to have other projects that don't necessarily always need to be just funny. Like I like maybe if people get laughs out of them, it's cool, but it is nice to be able to use a different part of your creativity and make something that isn't just, you do stand up, the goal is be as funny as possible, but you make a film and it's like some of it can be funny, but some of it can be more reflective and more like, well, this is kind of what I was seeing, and this is more of like what I'm reporting on versus just it always has to be a laugh. So it's kind of cool. And you're right. Yeah, people discover you in different ways, and then they might like your comedy too. And so you have more out there, which is cool.
Yeah. So who is filming you during this whole documentary? Like who's on the road with you?
So the guy who came out with me is this guy named David. He was a coworker of mine, actually. We both worked together at this job pre-pandemic. And then the pandemic happened. That job, everybody got laid off, like so many other people. So I had never really worked with him on like a big project. Like I had worked with the guy who edited it. Jesse is the guy who's filmed me for all of the Jake on the Streets. He's kind of been my film go-to guy whenever I have a project. Like I go to Jesse. So David and I had a working relationship, but we had never done any real projects outside of work. So I initially asked Jesse because I was just like, hey, I have this idea, I want to do this, but he still had a day job, so he couldn't take a month off. But David was unemployed because we'd gotten laid off and he still hadn't found a job yet. And so he was free to do it. And I reached out to him. I was like, I have this idea, I tried to explain like it's going to be a passion project. We are not going to make any money off this. I can't really pay you anything. But he was not doing a whole lot during that summer, and he had the time and he had the equipment too. He's a camera guy. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, I told him about it. He was interested, and we kind of just made it happen from there. So it was just me and him. It's like it was a 2-man operation for the entire month. So it was, it was a lot of work because he had to basically be filming throughout the day. We would do stuff on the street or B-roll while we were driving or setting up for the comedy show. So yeah, he deserves a lot of credit for being able to capture as much as he did. And it's kind of, yeah, I mean, this project is 3 people. It's me, David, who filmed it, and then Jesse, who edited it. So it's a very small crew who made this all happen.
Nice. Are there any things that you didn't get on camera that you think would have been good for the documentary, or any moments when you're on the road where you're like, fuck, I wish I got that on camera?
Nothing like specific that I was like, oh shit, that was crazy. But you do realize overall, you just realize the limitations of what one person with one camera can do. Like I would have loved to have a second guy where I could be like, hey man, go out for 2 hours and just get a bunch of B-roll of all the cities, or get a secondary angle on this interview so we could cut back and forth, because so much of it is like, it was so run and gun, especially when you're dealing with drunk people. Like a lot of the bar interviews, it's like, and there's a part in the documentary where there's a guy who's very upset at us, and he's like, being like physically threatening and like talking about like beating our ass. And it's like, dude, like, it's just me and a dude with a very expensive camera. And so like, we're not trying to get in a fight, obviously. So it it would have, you realize how I realized truly how much work it takes to put together, and I'm very like proud of what we did, but having a second person to film or just to be like almost like a PA, just to like help us would have been so nice, you know. But you go with what you have, and it's like clearly a DIY kind of passion project. So that's what we had, and we had one guy to do it, and I think we got a lot. But yeah, like it's it's crazy to film everything. I mean, at some point he has limits. He's like, I'm tired. I can't keep, you know, like he has to
Yeah.
eat and sleep and like just live too. Like, so like, yeah, just having a secondary person probably would have been helpful to be like to get some more of it. But I think we did a pretty decent job for what our limitations were to get a lot. I think it worked out in that way.
Yeah, no, it definitely came together nicely, and it definitely like people could feel like kind of how raw it was, and I think
Right.
that's kind of a dope element of it.
Yeah.
Did he have a drone? I definitely saw some cool like drone shots when you
He
were like in.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
he had a drone, and he had he had a like a main camera, and then he had a secondary camera sometimes for comedy shows. He had a little GoPro for some stuff, and then he did have a drone that we, but like even that, like he can't be filming and operating the drone. So it would have been great to have a second guy to be like, maybe you get more drone footage while he does this. But again, it's we have you have what you have. And I think that's, you can still make really cool stuff with limited resources, especially this day and age when cameras are so powerful and you have phones and the internet. But like, you know, there is at some level limitations to what one person can do with any amount of equipment. But yeah, he did have a drone, and that helped get us some pretty cool shots for specific uses in the film.
so throughout you, there's a lot of drunk bar interviews. You've done
Yeah.
just a plethora of like Jake on the street interviews. I saw some pretty wild stuff happen in the documentary. I don't want to give anything away, but in between this documentary and Jake on the streets, what's like been the craziest thing, like an unexpected encounter that you've had with someone you've interviewing, or someone or a bypasser?
Yeah. I
I mean,
mean, in the doc, there's a pretty specific one that if you watch it, you'll see like obviously that was the most dramatic. With a guy who is pretty upset that I was wearing a Star of David chain in Denver, and he had some pretty choice words, and he was the guy who was like basically like, I'm gonna beat your fucking ass. Um, the Jake on the Streets has covered so, I mean, we went to the protest in Portland, we went to a Trump rally, we went to the Proud Boy rally, we've been to we did a one that was well, I don't even remember, a straight pride basically rally, defending the straight marriage or something like that out in Sandy, Oregon. So we've covered a lot of pretty extreme events, and with those events come extreme people and extreme situations. So I mean, it's hard to say one because so many, we've been, kind of intimidated by people on both sides. We've had, multiple threats of violence to us on different events. People trying to smash the camera, people kind of crowding us to kind of try to intimidate us, you know, vague threats of we think you're a cop or we think you're Antifa. So it's a weird world when you start to go into these high pressure situations. Not like I'm some fucking war journalist or I'm going to Iraq, but people, when people have strong beliefs, they'll do a lot to defend those, and they don't want them to be either misrepresented or they just don't want to be covered potentially. So I learned a lot about people over these last few years, just dealing with them in these types of situations where it's intense, and people aren't messing around in some of these situations. And a lot of the things we were doing in Portland and the surrounding areas, there were weapons, there were guns, there people had, were armed, and that's something to be careful about. So like now doing a lot of these interviews for this documentary, it's like, oh, these are just drunk people. Like I've dealt with guys holding fully armed, like, loaded automatic weapons. So the idea that it just doesn't, like, it doesn't really phase me. And even the weapons, honestly, I got used to those very quickly, like probably more quickly than I thought I would. At the first you're like, Jesus Christ, dude, there's like a lot of guns here. And then you kind of just, they just kind of fade into the background of like, yeah, when you go to a Proud Boy rally, there's going to be a bunch of people with guns. You know, when you go to a protest, there's going to be people with guns. And I don't know if that's a good thing to get used to or if society should be getting used to it, but it just kind of became a norm of going to these places. So yeah, I got a good education in extremism, I would say, over the last few years. So this documentary is lower on the tier of that, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's good that you like build up a tolerance for that, you know. Now you could go fucking anywhere, you know, like next
Yeah,
Jake on the streets in Russia, you know, like see what
I know,
happens.
right? I would love to go.
So, all right. So I'm gonna move away from like kind of the media stuff that you're doing. One thing
Sure.
that one way you've been able to kind of differentiate yourself from most comics is your ability and like to do crowd work, and you've done numerous crowd work sets and specials. One of which you released on Tubi. How did you get involved with Tubi? Did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you?
So the special that's on Tubi right now, I actually originally had put on my YouTube and it's still there if people want to see it there. Tubi is free, so you can see it there or YouTube, but I'd put it on YouTube and then it was out there for, I don't know, maybe 9 months, a year. And this small production company out of Cincinnati called 4x3 Productions emailed me and said, hey, like we're looking to kind of get into the stand-up comedy. They do like independent movies and smaller films. They're like, we're trying to look into more stand-up and we're trying to do this thing where we put out specials. So they basically like said, can we take your special and try to pitch it to these things? They were ended up able to get it on Tubi. And so that's how it's up there. And they're filming their own specials. They're filming. I have some friends in Chicago. They're doing one in a couple weeks, and they're doing LA stuff. And so they're kind of really making a push to get like maybe more unknown comedians to put their hour down. So
That's
that's how I
cool.
got on Tubi. But yeah, and then the crowd work thing I've been doing. I don't exactly remember when I started. I do remember though. I mean, because you've been doing comedy for how long now?
Coming up on 4 years, a little over three and a half.
Okay, so like like when you're starting, it's tough. I mean, you're not good.
Yeah,
Like you have a lot more bad sets than you do good, right?
yeah.
When you're first starting, and I remember just kind of I had a really bad month where I was doing a lot of open mics and just anything I was writing was just not working. It was just eating shit. And I kind of just got frustrated to the point of like, I can't really do any worse if I just didn't go up on stage with anything. Like I was just like, you've had a really rough month of nothing working.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just try not to bring anything and just kind of go off the top of your head. And I started just to kind of get an inclination. I was like, oh, I'm like okay at this, like in the moment stuff, talking to people, riffing on stuff. So it kind of just was out of frustration with early comedy struggles, basically, of just like it not working, and kind of became a thing I was able to do more. And then I recorded the original crowd work special like 3 weeks before the pandemic. Luckily, like I filmed it on uh, February 22nd, and then 3 weeks later the world shut down. So I was lucky that I got it under the wire. But that was like, I think I was about 6 years into comedy, and I just was like, I had a goal of like doing a crowd work album. And again, I just worked with one guy basically, and he was able to film it at the Fun House, and I ended up getting the audio onto Helium Comedy Records as an album first, and then I released it on video a bit later. So yeah, it was just something that I kind of again had a goal to do. I wanted to do a crowd work album. I thought I was like I could do an hour of crowd work, and yeah, it worked out well, and people seem to respond to it. And now it's like something where like I'm figuring out like where it should be. And I feel like you never want to pigeonhole yourself. Like you don't want to just be known as just a crowd work guy. You want to be known for being a great comedian. And I don't know who your favorites are, but a lot of my favorites are really good at kind of like all of it. I mean, like they're good at jokes. Their jokes are great. They're well written. They're funny. They're good at crowd work. They're good at riffing. They're just like funny fucking people.
Yeah, and I
And Dave
think
Attell is probably the best. Dave Attell can write a great joke. He can talk to people. He can riff. He can make shit up in the moment. And Patrice O'Neill was really good at that. If you ever watched, if people don't know Patrice O'Neill because he's passed away, but his special Elephant in the Room, if you watch it, I always forget because there's a couple of versions out there, but I pretty much believed in the in the special he released to the public, he's got great material, but a number of times he just talks to the crowd, which is like a pretty big risk when you're filming a special. It could go bad. You could make the whole hour awkward. And he was just so good at everything like that. And so, yeah, you just don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You want to be good at it all. And so there's always like, for me, like, what kind of set should this be? Should I talk to them more? Should I do material more? And that's, I think, every comic and every artist is going to have their own vision of what they want to do in their journey. But that's how I'm kind of looking at it now, I guess.
Yeah, it's just crowd work is such a valuable skill because it's like you want to be funny in any situation, and I think people really appreciate it, like the audience does, because they know that this is like something that is only going to exist in that moment, in that room, at that time.
Yeah, for sure.
One special, or not special, but one comic I saw at Helium was Jeremiah Watkins, and he
Oh
did
yeah.
crowd work the entire time, and it was fucking amazing. It was hilarious.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's out there. More and more comics, I think, are doing it, especially because we live in the day and age of the clip. And the clip, you don't always want to burn a joke. Maybe you are saving it for a special or you're still working on it, but a crowd work moment will never happen again. You're not burning material. So I think more and more comics seem to be dedicating part of their set to, like, I need to get a couple crowd work clips out of this. Adam Ray is big on that. Stavros is doing a ton of crowd work now. And maybe they were doing it before, but you can see it online all the time now. Like, you see major comics. Sam Morrell and Mark Norman are doing maybe not crowd work, but they do these like Q&As where they just have the audience kind of yell at a topic and they riff on it. So
yeah, I've been seeing that on Mark's like Instagram. They get some good clips.
Yeah, so I think that's just the nature of comedy currently, is that it's a very internet focused thing where you need to have consistent videos out. And if you're a comic, it's obviously you want to hold on to your act because the jokes you write, it's really hard to write a great joke, and you don't want to just throw it out to the internet especially if you're gonna have people coming to see you live. So this is a way that comics can reach out to people who are unfamiliar with them but don't ever burn their jokes. And so I think you'll probably see more and more comics trying to do it, because truth be told, like, I know people who like think it's hack. I have had people tell me they think it's hack that I do crowd work, and it's funny to see how it's changed in the perception, because now you have big comics doing it. Not like I was the only one, but I just feel like people are like, oh, that guy, he does crowd work, and a lot of people like it. But some people were like, that's not comedy, you're just bullshitting up there or whatever.
Yeah.
And now it's like almost like a staple. Like, you almost have to be able to do that if you want to be in the game now. So it's funny how shit changes. You can't do anything about it, but it's out there.
Yeah. We'll wrap this up here pretty soon. I'm curious, like, what's next? Of course you have Back at It just released on your YouTube channel, but what's next for you in terms of, film, comedy, maybe another special or video project?
I definitely have, I have like a lot in my mind, and then it's just like, what can you actually do? Like, I am moving to New York, and after I'll be in New York for like most of September with a few weekends down in the Carolinas and half of October. And then I'll be back on the road for like mid-October through the first week of November. But starting in early November, I'll pretty much be like a permanent like New York City resident, living there, trying to just get into that scene. And so I might do like weekends here or there on the East Coast where you can get, take a train up to Boston or down to Philly or DC, but I won't have the van in New York starting in November. So I'll be like a New York based comic and try to make inroads there. So I'll be taking some time off from the road. The goal is to start putting together a material only album. I'd like to do an album, because I've never done one. I've done a crowd work album. I'd love to do like this is an hour of jokes kind of thing.
Nice.
And get that out there. It's tough because I'm sure like any comic knows, like, you write a joke, you like the joke, there's a life to the joke, you get sick of the joke, you don't want to tell that joke anymore, even if it's funny. Yeah. So I have jokes that I'm like, I could put this on an album, but now I'm kind of tired of those jokes. And so, like, do I write a whole new chunk? Do I, I don't know. So that's like, I think, a constant tension in every comedian's mind is like, is this done? Am I past this? Like, am I not really this comic anymore?
Yeah.
And then I do have other ideas for film stuff. I have this idea that I don't know if like I don't know if people would relate to. I was talking to a comic yesterday and he seemed to like it, but um I've had this idea for a few years of wanting to do a tour, like another film comedy tour, but just the idea is that I would only do black rooms. So I would be
Okay.
a white comic doing only black rooms and like kind of talking about that experience and interviewing comics about it, because I think it's still kind of like not always known to the general public that there is this kind of division between black and white comedy in a lot of ways. And like I think it would be an interesting thing to show and explore, and it would be a very good challenge for me as a comedian, because like any white comic who's done a black room knows that there's a major difference. And I'm sure a lot of black, I mean, I can't speak for black comics, I'm not one, but I'm sure black comics, it's more common that black comics have to do white rooms than white comics have to do black rooms is the other thing. So I think it would
Yeah.
be interesting to show that, because as a white comic, you pretty much can decide if you want to do black rooms or not. As a black comic, to make it in the mainstream, you're almost guaranteed you're going to have to do a lot of white rooms, right?
Yeah.
So, especially in a town like Portland, when there's very few black rooms, anyways. So I think it'd be an interesting thing to do like a tour and be like the only white comic on a lineup and kind of doing that. But that's like an idea that I don't know. That takes a lot of planning. It would take a film crew. It would take all the things that we talked about. Like it's not just something you can just go do. And I'd want it to be done in a way that people would enjoy, and that it wouldn't seem like off or weird. So I don't know, maybe having some like black tour mates to let go. I don't know if I would just do it by myself or what, but that's kind of like the only like real film thing. I'd like to continue doing Jake on the Streets on the East Coast, but I would have to find a new cameraman, because the guy who I've done all this stuff with still lives in Portland. But I do think that this next year is going to be pretty intense, starting with the election. Like the election is going to bring out a lot of that crazy shit again,
Yeah.
especially with like all the Trump stuff going on right now. And I think it'll heat up. The 2024 election will probably be the craziest one America has seen, I imagine. So there's so many things that you want to do, but the idea, there's a big, huge gulf between the idea in your head and putting it into the world. So
I feel that
obviously the main focus is stand up. And I do have a podcast that I do every week called the Jake Silberman Show that's current. And I do, that drops every Friday. So that's a project that is always going, and, hopefully that we can get that to grow and stuff. So yeah, you always have these things that you want to do, but getting them done is a completely different task. So, shout out to anybody who's doing anything, especially independent, because not having financial or like resources behind you and just doing it DIY is literally like it's night and day for these people who have crews and money. It's just not, you're not really even playing the same game,
yeah.
it's a completely different world. And shout out to any person in any art who's doing DIY stuff, because it could get down and depressing real fast. It is a dark, lonely road in a lot of ways.
Totally. I do I do actually a lot of like YouTube stuff, or I've been doing it like this last year, kind of
Yeah,
like vlogs, basically like behind the scenes of comedy scenes, sort of like 10 minutes long. And it's just so hard. There's countless ideas that I've like wanted to put into
sure.
fruition, but it's like you said, it's just so hard to like find the time. You got to prioritize it, and then remember that you have like a life and are a person and have so many other kind of like responsibilities
Yeah.
and stuff. But yeah, is there any final thoughts that you have for the audience, listeners, viewers out there?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good. It's like I'm happy with the project. I think it's something that people, if they take the time to watch, will enjoy it. Being from a comedian, I know obviously a lot of comics probably watch it on the first go, but then, as an outsider, it's kind of a cool insight into both comedy and then just, a slice of life in America at a very specific, unique time. So I think people will enjoy it. And, the biggest thing you can do for independent artists and creators is share their stuff. Obviously, like, money is necessary and you need money to make all these things happen. But, following somebody on social or sharing it with people you think would enjoy it is like, man, that's invaluable. And I think, and it really is a way that people, they literally just a click of a button, just push follow. You can mute us. It doesn't matter. Like, just like something. Like, it's all these things are like, it's a frustrating that in some way this is what like art is, but like, we can't change the entire game. We have to play by a certain set of rules. And right now the set of rules is get big on social media, get your stuff out there to a lot of people, and hope you can build like an independent fan base, because the gatekeepers might not have that much power, but there's just kind of in some way a new gatekeeper, which is an algorithm, so you have to be in that. You have to be in that stream to get anything. So follow everybody. If you see someone you like, give them a shout out. No one is ever mad that they got a DM from somebody saying they liked their thing. Don't be afraid to reach out. Most of us who are at this level will talk to you because we are not too big to talk to anybody. I respond to pretty much everybody who hits me up. And so, yeah, follow people, like their stuff, and, hopefully we'll all rise in some way together.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link in the description here your documentary Back at It and Jake on the Streets, kind of everything we talked about. Everyone, make sure to subscribe to Jake's YouTube channel, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and go out and see some live comedy. Jake, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great talking to you. Good catching up, and I look forward to what you have to come.
Awesome, dude. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.